Okay, so I'm Maiela, and for my senior project, I designed an off-grid solar system. Okay, so when I was deciding on a project, I didn't have that many ideas, and so Mom suggested that maybe we do something with our cabin. We have an off-grid cabin near Lafarge, and it seemed like a good idea because it fit like the times what we had to work with at the moment. I have a lot of access to the resources and people that kind of are part of this like world, like electricity and solar. My mother, she owns a solar business, and she always has kind of worked in renewable energy for since I was little. But before this, I didn't have a lot of experience with solar electricity. We went on a trip to Puerto Rico a few years ago to do a service/vacation thing, and we ended up installing solar on a couple of like community homes kind of across Puerto Rico after the hurricane hit. And so those are some of the pictures. And then besides that, I had one public school class where I started like learning about solar in an academic way, but it was really underwhelming, and the teacher was lacking, to say the least. So this is kind of like what I'm going to go over today. I have like some fundamental principles about electricity that are going to help make more sense for everything later. The system components and what they do. Then I'm going to go over what a load analysis is and show you my calculator. And then I also have a one-line diagram that I made. Okay. So first we have volts, amps, and watts. So those are the metrics that we use when we're talking about electricity, and that includes solar. The equation that like applies to a lot of stuff when we're talking about this is volts times amps equals watts. You can see that's like, it's a math problem, so you can also have like watts divided by volts equals amps, etc. And often what people use when they're talking about this is this water analogy. So in this analogy, the volts equals the water pressure, and the amps equal like the flow rate of the water, like how fast the water is flowing. And then we also have watt hours. So if watts are power, you can imagine that a watt is basically, well, it says right there, how many watts are pulled from your source over an hour. That's more what we use when we're talking about solar systems than just watts by themselves. And then we also have amp hours, and batteries are usually measured in amp hours, and it's the same thing, how many amps you can discharge your battery to in an hour. Okay, so we also have AC versus DC circuits. AC stands for alternating current. That means that the current flows in alternating directions periodically, and that's the kind of electricity that's used in houses and other kind of residential and like basically any electricity that you use. There's a couple reasons for this. Voltage and current in AC form are easier to manipulate with our transformers, which is what we use to step up and step down electricity. And it's also, because of that, it's more efficient over long distances. If we have a lower current over a long distance, you don't have to use as big wires, and so it's safer and it's just easier. And it's also easier to produce AC power, and that's because it's like basically the way you do it is with a really big electromagnet. What's that? Okay, and then the other one is DC current. That stands for direct current, and it's pretty self-explanatory, but basically the current flows in one direction. Energy is stored in DC current, so that's your batteries, but it's also used in all your 12-volt systems, like to charge your cell phones and your computers, electric vehicles, TVs. There's some other stuff, but it's not usually used for the grid because it's harder to transform AC to DC. I mean, yeah. Yes, and it's the same reason it's hard to transport it over long distances. It's hard to produce high voltage and carry it across long distances. It's also not as safe. Those are like kind of like the mathematical graphs of it. So you can see this is sine wave. That's generally how we think of AC current, and then that's DC current. But AC current also comes in those different graphs over there. Okay, so then I'm going to go through the components in a solar system. So we have, these are the main four. These first four are the main ones. Solar panels, charge controller, battery bank, and inverter. And so the sun, starts the power, and it goes all the way to the house in that order. I also wanted to mention that there's like a reason that we call it a system on purpose. So the nature of any system, if you change one input, the outputs change, and that applies here too. If you change like some part of this system, the other parts of the system are going to change as well. Okay, so we're starting with solar panels. I think pretty much everybody knows what a solar panel looks like, but that's what a solar panel is. It collects the sun and with little photovoltaic modules, and it has a cute little electric chemical reaction that goes on. I think essentially it like strips the electrons and then turns those into electricity, and it charges your batteries. So, but before it goes in your batteries, it has to go through the charge controller, and I'll tell you what the charge controller does in a second. But when you're choosing solar panels, you have to make sure that the power ratings on coming off of your solar panels fit with your charge controller. Yeah, it also has to fit with your battery size, meaning that if your PV system is too big, you're just going to be like creating a lot of extra electricity, and probably are going to be spending too much money like on a too big charge controller or wiring or whatever. And if it's too small, then your batteries will never like fill up all the way, which is just super inefficient. But they are also very inexpensive. Like over the past 10 years, they've gotten way, way, way cheap. So it's definitely better to like be producing too much power than too little power. Okay, so we have a charge controller. This is not a very common thing. It's not like we don't know about this just in normal life, but it's really cool. What it does is it regulates the power coming off of your solar panels, so it's safe for the battery. And basically, if you can imagine like your panels sitting in the sun all day, there's different amounts of sun that are hitting the panels at different times throughout the day. And if it went straight into the batteries, it would spike and it would be really low at different points. So basically what the charge controller does is it makes all that voltage uniform, so you're not hurting your batteries. It's pretty cool. Another thing is, once you get to the size of your system, it's usually, you choose one of these 12, 24, 48 volts. Sometimes there's 6-volt systems, but generally not really. And so your charge controller is kind of what starts that off. You get a charge controller that you want the voltage of your system to be at. So if I wanted a 48-volt system, I would have to get a charge controller that was rated for 48 volts going to the battery system. It also has what's called a nominal power rating, and this is not super important, but like basically the wattage coming off of your solar panels is not supposed to exceed the nominal power rating. But also that's not a very big deal. Just saying. Also, it's just like a thing, you can't really make it yourself, so it's sometimes expensive, but there's ways to like fix up your system and fit it all together where it's not gonna. Okay, so then we have our battery bank. Batteries are storing the electricity coming off of your panels in DC form, and they're generally considered the heart of the system, and that's because every other aspect of the system is either drawing or taking from the batteries. Similarly, if the system has a nominal voltage already that you've decided you want your system to be sized this way, there's a couple ways to make your batteries equal that. So how do I say this in the best way? Okay, so you can either wire your batteries in series or parallel. We're going to pretend that we want a 48-volt system, and we have two 24-volt systems and batteries with 10 amps. So they're 24-volt, 10-amp batteries, and we have two of them, and we want a 48-volt system. So what we can do is we can wire our two batteries in series. That means positive to negative terminal. And across that circuit, the voltage is going to double. If we were to wire it negative to negative and positive to positive terminal, that would be called parallel, and the amperage would add up across that. So we would have 10 times 2, which would be 20 amps. But if we want a 48-volt system, our first option is going to work a lot better. The other thing to mention is there's basically two kinds of batteries, lead acid and lithium ion. Lead acid are cheaper, but they're heavier, and they don't last as long, they're not as durable, and they only have a 50% discharge, which means that where you'd have to buy one lithium ion battery, you'd have to buy 2 lead acid batteries. And then there's lithium ion, which are lighter, they last longer, you can discharge them 100%. There's a couple like different kinds within that, but they are more expensive. Okay, so then we have our inverters. This is another thing. Another thing, like the charge controller that you can't make yourself, so sometimes it's expensive. Basically what an inverter does is takes the DC power from your batteries and switches it into AC power, so you can use it in your house. There's not too many like specific ratings on this, but again, the voltage has to be the same as whatever size system you're choosing. And then it outputs basically only 120 volts or 240 volts AC. If you're doing an off-grid system, you're basically never gonna be creating a 240 volt system, but that is an option. And then it outputs that 120 volts into your main breaker and into your house. Is there anything else we need to say? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so then you have your main breaker box and your BOS. So your main breaker box, everybody has this in their house. It's where all the electricity comes to and goes out of. That's a really, really neat one. Usually they don't look that good. And then you have everything else in your system. So that's like your fuses and your breakers, stuff like that that protects it, and your wiring, and then your combiner boxes and connectors, anything else like that. Okay, so now I'm going to go over a load analysis, which is where you start with any solar system. You always start with a load analysis. So like this is what you do. You go through your load analysis, you size your system for whatever load you get. You buy the stuff, and then you install the stuff. All right, so our cabin is really small. We don't have that many appliances in it. So this was really like a simple process for me, and I think I can anticipate that it'll be much more difficult depending on how big you want to, how big of a house or whatever you want to power. But basically what you do is you go around and you find all the appliances in your house and you check the wattage ratings on them, and you add that up and you estimate the amount of time that you are going to use each appliance and add that up, and that's going to give you your total watt hours. Those are that's like a washer, hair dryer, stuff like that. Some examples. And then you have to factor in a couple things. So days of autonomy and climate restrictions. So climate restrictions kind of look like, depends on like where you are and where you're building your system. So for us in Wisconsin, we get about 4.5 hours of sun per day. So that's average throughout the year. So you want to factor that into your system so that you know how much power you're going to need. And then days of autonomy, this only applies to like completely off-grid systems. There's some you can install solar systems where you're still tied to the grid. They're called grid-tied systems. And when you're not making power from the sun, you just take energy from the grid. So you're never like without power. But if you didn't factor your days of autonomy, Is your off-grid system, what would happen is that if there was like a day where there was no sun, you would not have any power. So that's pretty important. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a calculator that I made to help you figure this stuff out. I don't know.
And are you going to share screen?
I think it's still shared.
Do I have to?
I don't think you need to change it.
Okay.
Okay. Wait, how do I get out of this now? Okay. Okay. So I need to be able to do this. So up here we have, this is like the load analysis aspect of it. So these 8 right here are specific to my cabin, like what I've been working with, but I wanted to show you guys what it would be like, or just kind of like by themselves, what things look like. So if you say you have one refrigerator, so you have one, you have a hot tub, you have a space heater, maybe you have a dishwasher. I don't know what you have. You could have anything, but you can see right here, this is where the total watt hours per day, this is where it's adding up. And that's like quite a bit. So if you're not on a, if you're not, yeah. So that doesn't really happen, obviously, but I guess this is just to show you like, that's quite a bit. And if you're not using a solar system, you're using coal burning processes. And that's like a lot of coal, I guess. I wish I could show you better, but that's a lot of coal to be burning for your hot tub, which is only like, you're only using it 2 hours a day. And if you decided that you wanted to be in your hot tub for like 8 hours a day, it would go up a lot. Okay, I'm not gonna go, but yeah. So, okay, so these are the ones that I have. They're not very interesting. Okay, but here we have, my total watt hours per day. And then if I factor in my days of autonomy, I just times this by 3, and that's what it is. Okay, so now we go down. Sorry, I don't have really as articulate words for this part as I would like, but it is what it is. So, yeah. So here we have, this is, rounded up total storage of what I need to be able to make for my system. So if I'm choosing a battery voltage, it's better to go bigger, because if your voltage is higher, your current can be smaller, and everything else can be smaller with that. So we ended up deciding on a 48 volt system, but you can see, I'll show you later what it looks like if I were to use a smaller system. And then once you have your voltage and your watt hours, you can find your amp hours, and that refers you to what kind of batteries you're going to use, and that's this part. But we're going to go over to solar panels first. So here we have, well, no, we skipped over one part. So here, so this is how much sun we have in Wisconsin. So in order to find how many watts of solar I need to divide my storage by how much sun I'm making. I have, and that equals this number. And then I go over here, and we already had like these solar panels that we're going to use. So they're rated for 370 watts, 48 volts, and 9.7 amps. And in order to make that 1,111 number, we needed 4 panels. Okay, so as long as you have that, your wattage is going to stay the same. If you have 4 panels and they're rated for 370 watts, no matter how you wire your panels, they're always going to be 1,400 watts. But there's different ways that you can, just like what we talked about with the batteries, series versus parallel, there's different ways to wire your panels. So this is an example of this right here. So if we were to do all 4 of your panels in parallel, you can see right here, this is the amperage multiplied by 4, multiplied by 1.25. 1.25 is kind of like the margin of error, I guess. But you can see that your amperage is much higher than it would be in this other way, which 2S2P, that means 2 strings of 2 panels wired in series, wired together in parallel. And right here, You can see it's much lower. And then the voltage as well. It doesn't really, this is 48 times 1.25 here, so it goes up a little bit, but it's really low. And if we do it in this 2S2P way, we have 120 volts, which is much higher. So then you're looking at a charge controller, and you can take this number and you divide it by the voltage, and that's going to give you the amperage for your charge controller. It can be much smaller when you use this 48 volts, but you can see if I were to use like a 12 volt system, my amps for my charge controller go up a lot more, and it's going to be more expensive, etc. So that's why it's better to have a bigger system like this. Okay, then we're going to order batteries. So when it comes to batteries, there's like different ways to like put them together and get what you need. So for this calculator, it kind of shows more about like price. So if I decided that I wanted lithium batteries and I wanted my 48 volt system, then I would be able to and I wanted to use like one battery that was 48 volts, then I could compare these two that are both 48 volts here by just like checking how much they would be. So this one, right, is $800, or this one is a lot more, $5,000. Those are just like random batteries from off the internet. I didn't like curate it or anything. Okay, and then we also have our inverter right here. Once you know what your voltage in your system is, and you know that you want to output 120 volts, then you're looking at inverters. The important thing to like take into consideration is basically this number. So this is your max load. This is just how many watts of all of your stuff times how much you have it, and those are your watts. So then you can divide that by your voltage and get, how do I say this? The peak. It's called the peak power. So you can't be drawing any more than 300. No, actually that's wrong for this. This is continuous power, but inverters have a rating called peak power. I think this one is 700. So you can see that the continuous power and the peak power is more than 284 watts. Wow. This sounds, okay. Okay, so yeah, that's basics of it. So I have like stuff picked out up here, but I'm not going to show you because it's really overwhelming. Okay. Can I continue with this? Okay. Okay, so then also as like a final thing to show like what my system looks like, there's things called one-line diagrams. And there's different ways of doing this, and like I think it matters mostly just like how people want to be able to look at the information that they've created. But for mine doesn't look like super, I don't know what the word is, industrial maybe, but it like shows me exactly what I need to know for creating my system. So you can see I have like the 4 panels up there, and they're wired in series and wired in parallel. It shows how much voltage and how much amperage is coming off of those. Goes into the charge controller, and the charge controller is 150 volts and 35 amps, which is safely above 96 volts and 20 amps, etc. And it goes on like that. We haven't chosen like specific batteries, so I didn't have a lot of information to put in there, but you can use your imagination. And then we have the inverter going to our house. That's pretty much it. And then those two are like examples of maybe what like other ones would look like, other diagrams. I don't know, not super into that. Okay, all right, so that's the end basically, but I do have to say thank you. Jason is my mentor. He's been like a family friend for a really, really long time, and he's like such a wonderful human being. I don't know, I'm constantly amazed that I have so many amazing people in my life. And then I have my mom, who helped me a lot. She's really cool. She's a really cool lady. Sean is also really inspiring. He helped with odds and ends, I suppose. And he's just like infinitely generous. And then also David, who's my father, and he's not alive anymore, but he spent his life doing a lot of renewable energy related stuff, and he was an electrician and stuff. So I think in some ways, I don't know, there's some honorary aspects of this project. Yeah, so that's the end, and I'm done. Does
Wow.
anybody have?
Nice diagrams. Let's get this party started. Oh, that was earlier. All right, so now would be a time for questions. Comments?
I think he was like,
So yeah, just feel awesome job, Maiela. You can write into the chat box. Are you planning to install the system on your cabin?
Yeah, that's part of it. We haven't obviously gotten around to it, and that was the plan at the beginning. But just like with the winter and other life stuff that happened, it just didn't really work out like that. And it's fine.
Good job. Great job.
Oh my god.
How much would your system cost?
I'm not exactly sure, but I can figure it out. I was like, I don't have the batteries like figured out yet, but if I like looked at all the components and how much their price is, then
Give a rough idea.
Oh, I'm not good at estimating. I would say,
$3,000.
okay, 3,000.
$3,000. Good. I learned a lot. Thanks for making it so clear.
Really? I mean, yes.
Wow, lots of information. Great presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, people from the audience, let's open it up.
I have a question. In your diagram,
Yeah.
how did you have the solar panels hooked up? They're like this.
Okay, so
Was that
Two are in
parallel or
series.
is that?
Okay.
Maiela, repeat the question.
oh, she asked how the panels were hooked up. So they were wired. It's called two strings. Those were wired in series, so that's positive and negative, and those the voltage is added, and the voltage is added, and then those two strings were wired in parallel.
Oh.
So then the amperage adds on both of those. So basically, the voltage and the amperage both double.
We got two questions here from the world, which is Zoom world. Are you planning to do more with renewable energy, and what would you like to study after high school?
One of my favorite questions. Yes, I think so. I like for my college stuff, I put down like electrician-y kind of stuff when they asked me what I was interested in, but it's mostly because I didn't want to say undecided. I do want to, but I don't know what form it would take. But it's been like so impressive on me. I don't really understand how it could like disappear from my life, I guess. Yeah.
This is a loaded question. But what if you don't want to use a AC current? What if you want to use just DC current? Can you do that right off your batteries?
I think you can, but it's more dangerous. There is ways. I could not tell you about it. But yes, I know you can because there's some appliances that just use 12 volt DC. So yeah, definitely.
Two questions here. What's the difference in designing and installing an off-grid versus an on-grid system?
Okay, well, I don't know very much about on-grid, but there's a difference in inverters. One of them is like, I don't know if it's like a grid-tied inverter specifically, or if it's like you don't need an inverter. I think you do though. And you also don't need the battery bank,
Right.
because like what I mentioned before. But I didn't look into the other side of it very much.
Did you discuss the service aspect?
Okay, yeah, I did not. I think that the service aspect of this is the calculator is like helpful. It's it's underdeveloped still, I think, but I would like to add more onto it. And then
Can you just explain that that's a tool that you created? I don't think
that's a tool that I created. So like you just like type stuff in, type little commands in, and then it's more complicated than that, but it's really cool. I don't really know how to explain it well, but yes, I created it. And then
If people
Yeah.
can use it,
Yeah, people can use it. It's pretty accessible, I would say.
how do you access it?
I have not looked that far.
It's like pretty accessible from your computer.
I
Just come by, use my computer.
don't know.
If someone wanted to use it, you could just share it with them,
Yeah,
and they
yeah.
could make a copy and.
There's lots of
Populate.
ways. I guess there's just not like one specific like place to go to. If you
We
want
can
it.
make it available on our website or on our social media.
Okay.
Nice. Yeah, let's give it up.